So welcome everyone, I am Craig Bradford, I'm COO at Search Pilot, and today we're going to be running the webinar on SEO test ideas for fashion retailers. So before we get started, a couple of things that you might want to do. Number one is you can sign up to our email list and get a new case study every 2 weeks or so. There's lots of different industries on there. They're not all on fashion, but they range from really simple tests up to lots of more complicated and more advanced tests. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up at the link there, or you can scan the QR code to get on that list. Second thing is, if you tuned into the last webinar, it was on retail sites featuring Lowe's and Home Depot. And I do these a lot. These ones are done obviously in webinars, but I also do them for companies privately for their own team. So if that is something that you're interested in, you can book me to do one of these ideation sessions for you and the rest of your team. We'll come up with a bunch of test ideas, talk through the benefits of each, and it's been really, really valuable to the companies that I've done it for so far. So if that is something that you are interested in, you can email me on craig.bradford@searchpilot.com and we can set that up. All right, so let's get started. We're going to run through a few different areas. To begin with, we're going to start off with how to do SEO testing. We're going to then talk about how to come up with test ideas, move on to the actual test ideas themselves, and then we'll finish with hopefully some time for questions. All right, so starting off with how to do SEO testing. So one of the questions we get a lot is, why do we even need it? Can we not just make a change, go look at our analytics, and then figure out whether or not the change that we made increased traffic? And the reason that doesn't work is often when you go into your analytics, you will see something like this, where you make a change and then your traffic perhaps drops, perhaps maybe even it goes up. But it's really hard to know whether or not that change that you made resulted in the decrease or the increase in traffic, because there's lots of other things that could be going on at the same time. For instance, what if I told you that there was a Google update during this period, or this was during Thanksgiving? Now, worth mentioning that this particular site is actually a B2B software company. So Thanksgiving isn't a particularly peak period for them. Obviously, a lot of the people on the call might be in retail and fashion retail, and that tends to be a more busy period, let's say. The other area you might want to look at naturally is rank tracking and Search Console data. Again, that doesn't work either, because if you just look at Nordstrom as an example, they rank for over 3 million keywords according to Ahrefs. And that's only the ones that they're tracking. In reality, there's probably many, many more keywords, and it's just not possible to track every keyword that you might rank for. And even if you tried it, there's going to be a long tail of things that you are not able to track, and those could be the keywords that you're increasing or decreasing in. And you don't want to miss out on those gains or losses. So rank tracking doesn't work. Similarly, the same problem exists with Search Console data. A pretty recent study from Ahrefs showed that a lot of the data is actually hidden. And so although it's good for directional information, it's not accurate enough to be able to do something like SEO testing. It's just not, not good enough. So how do you do it? If you can't use rank tracking tools and we can't use Search Console, how do you actually do it? The first thing you do is you take a group of pages that are on the same template. So for instance, looking at this made up website, we have the women's category, and then underneath that we have shoes, skirts, jeans, etc. Now, although each of these pages obviously have different content, the jeans page has jeans, the skirts have skirts, the template is the same. So the design of the page, they all have, let's say, an H1, a search bar, an image, and then a block of text. So we then take that group of pages and we would come up with a hypothesis. So in this instance, we might want to test whether or not Google would give more value to the content at the top of a page as opposed to the bottom of the page. And this is something you see a lot on retail websites. There's that often, SEO text at the bottom of a category page. And we found that sometimes, depending on where the content is on the page, Google may or may not give the same amount of importance to it. So it might be a decent idea to test moving that content to the top of the page. So before we make that change, we have to first of all decide which pages are going to get the treatment. So which pages we're going to move that content on, and then which pages are going to be control pages. The way we do that is by taking that group of pages and looking at historical traffic patterns, and then SearchPilot divides them into control pages and variant pages. Now you can do this randomly, but you might accidentally introduce bias to the test before it even begins. As an example, if you did it randomly, you could get unlucky and all of the seasonal products are in the variant. So all of your winter products or all of your summer products are in the variant or in the control. And so then when you launch that test, you could see an increase in traffic that you think is because of the experiment, when actually it's just because of an external factor like seasonality. So that's where SearchPilot comes in. We automatically create two buckets of pages, one control, one variant, and then we only make the change to the variant pages. And so when we launch that test, in this instance, we've picked top, shorts, and swimsuits to be the variant pages. We would then only make the change to those pages, and then we can monitor the traffic to the variant pages compared to the forecast of the variant pages, and then also to the control set of pages, because we haven't changed those, and that's how we account for external factors. Once you launch the test, hopefully, if it's a winner, you would expect to see something like this. So what we're looking at here is the dotted line, this gray line, is when the test started. Everything before that point is the historical traffic, and that's what we use to build a model and create the forecast of the traffic. And as you can see here, this is a made-up example, but this is what a typical pattern looks like after you launch a test. There's an initial few days where Google is crawling the site and picking up the change, and then hopefully what you like to see is that the variant pages are outperforming the forecast of the variant pages. And so this would be hopefully declared a winning experiment. Now, it's at this point that I often get the question, isn't this just the same as Optimizely or other user testing tools? Now, the reason it's not is that those tools are used for measuring the impact on users, and that's why they split users. Whereas with SearchPilot, we are trying to measure the impact on Googlebot. That is the user that we care about in this instance. And so when you do user testing, you see this model on the left, there's essentially two versions of every single page. There's an A and a B of this page, an A and a B of the next page. And so if 100 users were to come and visit that page, 50 of them might see the control and 50 would see the variant. Now, while that's fine for users, it doesn't work for Googlebot because we can't send 50 Googlebots to an A and 50 Googlebots to a B. So instead of splitting users, that's why we split pages. So we might take 50 pages and leave them unchanged and have another 50 pages that we add the treatment to. And then that's what we use to compare the performance. So there's no duplicate content, there's no cloaking, there's nothing like that. And it is a very different purpose to other user testing tools. So this table sort of summarizes that. As you can see, the main row to look at here is the top one that shows that with tools like Optimizely, Adobe Target, the changes you make aren't shown to Google. They're only shown to users in the majority of the case. And so they're not possible to use for SEO testing, whereas SearchPilot is. And then the other thing to bear in mind, if you're trying to do this using client-side testing tools, there are some tools out there which are client-side as opposed to server-side. That can introduce a problem before the test even begins, because we know that Googlebot struggles with understanding JavaScript. We have done lots and lots of tests where moving content from being client-side rendered to being server-side rendered increases organic traffic. And so despite what Google says, we know that they still struggle to understand JavaScript, and SEO testing is hard enough without introducing problems before the test even begins. So if you are trying to do SEO testing using a client-side solution, just know that you're essentially doing two different tests at the same time. Test number one is, can Googlebot even see the change that you're making? And then test number two is the primary hypothesis that you're trying to hopefully test. So very quick demo of this is just a 1-minute video showing you what it looks like to make a test using SearchPilot. So this is an example of the eBay demo account that we use. And when you log into SearchPilot, you can make a section. In this instance, we're looking at the product pages of eBay. And if we look at eBay's product pages, the title tag at the moment is just the name of the product. Now, if you wanted to test that, let's say you wanted to add something like the price to that title tag, you can come into the platform, create a rule that replaces that title, and you can just enable that with the trigger. And now if we refresh that page, this is in our preview environment of SearchPilot, and you can see that the title has been changed to Dear Brighton SEO, which is when we did this demo video, and it's pulling that price in dynamically. So if the price was to update, it would automatically be updated as well. More importantly, if we look at the source code, you can see that this has been updated to be in there as well. So we know that search engines are going to see that. Nothing's been done using client side. And if we wanted to run that as a test, we can now just move that across to being a split test rule. And everything in this area would be applied to 50% of the pages as opposed to 100%. Once the test has been running, you can come into your test dashboard. You can look at the test that is running. And this is where we'll see those graphs that I just explained a second ago of the historical look back period, the test beginning, and then the impact since that test started. And so in this instance, it looks like a positive change. The graph below shows the cumulative impact of that test. So over time, how many extra sessions have been, as well as a confidence interval, whether it's statistically significant or not. Last but not least, this area shows what percentage of the pages has Googlebot crawled since the test began. And that's really helpful as sort of a sense check to understand how long is it going to take Googlebot to crawl all of these pages to get an idea of how long should you run this test. You can see how many days will it take to crawl 70, 80, 90% of the pages, etc. So that's it. Hopefully that gives you a quick idea of how we do that. Next, I want to talk about the value of SEO as a channel, because one of the things that I think we naturally think about when we look at SEO testing is obviously the winners that you're hopefully going to get. But I want to try and make this into a concrete example and how much this can potentially be worth to companies like Bloomingdale's or Nordstrom or companies of that size. So how much do you think a 1% drop in traffic would cost Nordstrom? Feel free to drop comments in the chat, and then I'll show you in a second or two. While I'm waiting on that, someone has asked, how do you know if Google crawls the test variant URLs? Do you need server log files? So we did it on our side to our engineering team. They can, we see, obviously, because we're server side, we see the traffic being requested. And so we can, we have that. We don't need log files. I'm just going to say that is answered. Okay, so back to this. So how much does it cost if you drop traffic by 1%? So let's look at the numbers to begin with. All of Nordstrom's digital sales are about 6 billion in the last year. This is taken from their investor center. I got this information from there. And you can see that total sales is in blue and then digital sales is in pink. So all 4 quarters, the pink area adds up to about 6 billion. Of that, organic search makes up about 2.6 billion. Now, all of these numbers are taken from third-party tools. I also don't work at Nordstrom. I don't have access to any other analytics. So I'm only just doing this from an outside-in perspective. I don't have access to that information. So I used SimilarWeb to try and get an estimate of that 6 billion, how much does organic search drive? And it estimates it's about 44%. So that is where I got the 2.6 billion from. And then of that, around about 78% is non-branded, 20% is 21% is branded. So that means that non-branded traffic to Nordstrom generates just over 2 billion. And again, this is taken from SEMrush. Estimates for these types of tools can be quite off, but directionally they're going to be correct, right? Even if you take half of this, it's still a big number. So non-branded, I'm going to estimate, is generating about 2 billion in revenue. And so the punchline is that just a 1% drop in traffic is worth 20 million in lost sales per year, which is an astonishingly large amount of money, given that SEO teams are expected to make changes and just know what Googlebot wants. And we know from doing a lot of testing on our side that it's very, very difficult to know with any certainty whether a change you make is going to be positive or negative. We see changes being negative all the time. And so if you're not doing any kind of testing, you're probably accidentally losing money when you roll out some of your changes. And that's where Search Pilot comes in. That's where SEO split testing comes in, because our whole mission is to prove the value of those changes and test their impact. So when you use Search Pilot, you can deploy changes instantly, and we can make sure that they're not negative by testing before we ever roll them out to a full-blown deployment. And so our CEO, Will Critchlow, I love this quote from him that says, sometimes our customers' biggest wins come from never deploying losers rather than from only deploying winners. If I was to look at Nordstrom or Bloomingdale's or Macy's or any of these big websites, it's probably fair that some of the parts of their website actually already do very, very well, right? They'll have certain categories that they dominate in, whereas there'll be other categories that they're trying to grow traffic and they're willing to take chances to grow that organic traffic. The strategies for either section of those should be very different. The cash cow sections of the website should be about never rolling out something accidentally, which is negative. Whereas the categories that are on page 2, page 3, the goal there is to obviously grow traffic very, very quickly and run lots and lots of experiments. So it's worth thinking about both sides. But I think the key takeaway here is if you're one of these websites that has a lot of revenue going through your website, it's absolutely nuts that people are deploying changes without a testing program in place. When we look at product teams, it's very well established that they do user research, they do a bunch of testing before they ever roll out something, whereas SEO teams haven't had the luxury until recently of being able to use testing tools like Search Pilot. Okay, hopefully that will make sense. So let's get into test ideation. How do we actually do it? So when I'm looking at a website and deciding what things we should change, I'm really looking at 3 key areas: crawling, indexing, and ranking. And the first 2 I kind of generalize into being, can you rank? So can Google crawl your website? Can they index the content? Are they able to access that information and then decide whether or not to keep it in the index? And then lastly, for the ranking piece, that's more about, should you rank? Is the content good enough? And once they've decided that you're in the index, should you be in position 1 or position 10? And so that's the 3 sort of key areas that I'm looking at when I'm evaluating a website. The next thing I like to do is look at the sites visually. So on the left-hand side here, I've got the key templates that we're going to be looking at today. So we get category pages and product pages, and that is both for Bloomingdale's and Nordstrom. And you can see we've got desktop and mobile pages as well. And so what I normally do is I sort of tag up these areas and I look at the templates and look for the differences between the brands. And so I've not got a spreadsheet like that for the fashion one, but on the right here, this is one I did for a bunch of travel websites. So this is Travel Supermarket, TUI, Jet2, and Love Holidays, all of which are mainly UK brands. And it's really nice to then just put this into a table and look at the differences between the brands. So I've sort of divided into core areas of the page and the content. So are they mentioning price? Do they have weather information? Is there a map? Is there FAQ content on the page? And then some other areas like trust and authority, internal linking, meta information, etc. And so just by doing this alone, you can see that it automatically generates a bunch of ideas essentially, because you can just go down and say, okay, is there anything that my company is doing that everyone else isn't? And so maybe we want to test not doing that, or the other way around. Is there anything that everyone else is doing that I'm not? So that's sort of where I start from. And then it's also important to make sure that you're looking at the same page as Google, because often when you look at a site, Google may not be seeing the same thing as you. There could be multiple reasons for that. Something could be client-side rendered, or it could be They could only be showing certain information to search engines. So don't take your competitors' websites at face value. You can look at their websites using something like the structured data testing tool. And the reason I like to use that is if you just go and look at your competitor's website in your browser, you're not Googlebot's user agent, and they can be doing other things to hide information. Whereas if you fetch the page using Google structured data, the testing tool, you can then go into the HTML of that page and search for the element that you're concerned about. So in this instance, I've looked for this sort of related products blog that is on Nordstrom. And what I found is that that's obviously client-side rendered because Googlebot's not seeing it. And I think this is the same for the review block of content as well on both Bloomingdale's and Nordstrom. So this is a really handy way to check that you're looking at the right thing. And then so once you've gathered a list of ideas, you obviously can't do all of them instantly. You have to have some way to prioritize which ones to start with. And this is the framework that we use at SearchPilot. So we divide the test into 4 quadrants. On the x-axis, we're going from, is this a weak hypothesis to a strong hypothesis? And then on the y-axis, it's moving from a cheap change to an expensive change. And so in an ideal scenario, we're looking for tests which are cheap to do and really good ideas. So that would be the top right quadrant. The bottom right would be things which are good ideas, but they're very expensive to do. So to give you an example of what I would class as being a strong hypothesis, it would be anything that is unlikely to be negative. So I would class things like structured data in there, and also case studies. So if you've seen something be positive somewhere else, I think that is as good as it gets when it comes to coming up with test ideas, right? As opposed to just using your own intuition. Whereas something in the bottom right, which is expensive and a strong idea, I think that would be navigational changes, internal linking changes, producing content. These are things which require a decent level of investment, and you want to make sure that it is indeed a positive change before you invest in that. And that's the final thing that we also use this 2x2 for, is not only which order to run the tests in, but also what level of confidence we need to declare that test a winner. So to use a top right example, so if we're looking for things which are a cheap change and a strong hypothesis, if I was testing something like adding product schema markup or FAQ markup to a page, the chances are there's no reason why that would be negative, right? And I've seen it be positive on other websites. We've got case studies, we've seen this be positive before. And so I'd say that's a strong hypothesis. And adding structured data for the majority of websites is relatively cheap to do. So if I was testing that, I might be happy to conclude the test at a lower confidence interval. Maybe I don't want to wait until 95% statistical significance. Maybe I want to just call it at 80%, because there's a very low chance that that is negative. Whereas if you are pitching that your engineering team should redesign your whole navigation, that you should move everything to be server-side rendered rather than client-side rendered, that's going to take a significant investment. And so I would wait until that's 95%, because to convince your engineering team to do that, you better have good data. And so that's how we use this as a sort of a framework, not just for what order to test in, but also what level of confidence we need to declare a winner. Okay, let's go on to the test. So internal linking is something that requires a little bit of explanation because it's more complicated than your typical test. When you do a standard SEO test, let's say it's a title tag test, the page that you change is the page that you expect to go up or down in traffic. That's not always the case with internal linking, because if we make a change, if we add a bunch of links to a group of pages, it's not necessarily those pages that we're trying to influence, it's the pages that we're linking to. So it's a bit more complicated to set up those tests. The way we do that is we, first of all, divide the pages into control and variant. And in this instance, we would do it on the category level. So we're saying that shoes, skirts, and jeans are control pages, and tops, shorts, and swimsuits are going to be variant pages. Everything that sits below that is therefore default in that category. So if we look at shoes, all of the shoe products would also be control pages, all of the skirts would also be control pages, whereas all of the swimsuits would be variant pages. And so imagine we wanted to run a test where we're adding more links to the category pages. This is what we call the testing section. These are the pages that we're actually making the change to. Whereas the pages that we're linking to, we would call the measurement section, because these are the pages that we think could go up and down as a result of that. And I should mention also these ones. So we're not just making a change, we are measuring the impact on the testing section, and we're also measuring the impact on the pages that we're linking to as well. Now, often with internal linking tests, there can be a trade-off. In this instance, what you might see is that these product pages get an increase in organic traffic, but maybe as a result, the category pages reduce in organic traffic because they're giving out more page rank. So the only way we can answer, are we better off by doing this test, is if we have a third section called measurement section 2 that measures the combined impact of the category page traffic and the product page traffic. And we can then say, okay, the categories went down by 5%, products went up by 25%. This is therefore worth doing. So hopefully that will make sense. With that bit of extra context, I want to jump into some internal linking test ideas for all the sites that we're looking at. So to start with, this is comparing Nordstrom on desktop versus mobile. So the desktop image is the one on the left-hand side here, and you see that the breadcrumbs are 4 levels deep. So we have home, men, clothing, and then dress shirts. But when I check on mobile, I can't see any breadcrumbs. I don't think they're there. Could be that these are just being hidden to make room for the filters. So this could be a deliberate change. It could be an accident. I've seen that happen before as well. But breadcrumbs are a great space for internal linking. And particularly now with Googlebot crawling so much from a mobile first perspective, I think this is a lost opportunity. I would test making sure that those breadcrumb links are on mobile as well as the desktop page. I mentioned briefly before that we've seen in some tests that Googlebot doesn't value content as much if it's hidden by default. So if the user has to take an action, then they may not give those links or that content as much value. And so with this, I would run a test to add the breadcrumbs to mobile as well as being on desktop. In addition to that, this is comparing now Bloomingdale's to Nordstrom. So Bloomingdale's has breadcrumbs, but there aren't as many of them. So as I said, Nordstrom has 4 levels deep, whereas Bloomingdale's only has 2. And so if I was Bloomingdale's, I would really test increasing the specificity of the breadcrumbs, because breadcrumbs are such a good opportunity to control your anchor text and the number of links that are going to pages. We can't do a lot. I mean, we can try our best to get external companies and external websites to link to us with the anchor text that we want, but it's somewhat out of our control. Whereas internal linking, we can control exactly what we want. So I think Bloomingdale's is missing out on hundreds or even thousands of links here to the clothing section, because they don't have that middle level of breadcrumb. So I would test increasing that level of breadcrumb to get more links to those pages. And then as an extension of that, although Nordstrom has these links, I think they can do even better, because they're not in the anchor text on that category is just clothing. Now, obviously, as a user, we can see that the breadcrumb is men, clothing, and then dress shirts. But why not change this to be men's clothing? And although we're talking about this as a single page, this would be true across all men's subcategories, whether it's dress shirts, trousers, shoes, underwear. All of those pages right now have a breadcrumb that just says clothing. And I would love to test making that more specific to make it say men's clothing. I think Bloomingdale's can do this as well. I've seen this be increased traffic by as much as 20% on the target pages and some of the other websites that I've tested this on. So please, whatever website you work for, review your breadcrumb anchor text, because it's one of the best ways that you can tell Google what these pages are about. And then going a level deeper, when we look at the product pages, both Bloomingdale's and Nordstrom have links to the brand, but they don't have any breadcrumbs on product pages. And I think this again is a missed opportunity to increase the number of links to all the categories above that, because product pages link to the subcategory they're in. So in this instance, men's shirts, they could be linking to men, they could be linking to the brand, and then all of those you can control the anchor text on that. So for both sites, I would test adding the breadcrumbs to product pages, but also the key here is you're getting a chance to increase the anchor text to the brand pages as well. So in this case, it would be men's Boss shirts as well as men's shirts. And across all product pages, that's going to be a huge increase in the number of internal links to those pages. So both websites can do this. And I have noticed this is a bit of a trend, not just these websites, but when I was doing some research for this, I have noticed a trend towards retail websites just removing breadcrumbs. And I think even ignoring my SEO hat for a second, as a user, I really like breadcrumbs. I find them useful to click back up to categories. Sometimes it can also help me discover the category that the product is sitting within. And so, yeah, I don't know whether this has been tested by product teams and have found that it increases conversion rate, but I'd find that I'd be surprised if that was the case. And certainly, if that is the case, I would love to know what the downside is on organic traffic as well, which very few teams tend to test both at the same time. In a similar vein, this is the related products that Bloomingdale's has. So in the bottom of category pages, there are the recently viewed items, and then below that, they have this popular related searches. And again, brilliant way to get lots of relevant internal links to those pages. Nordstrom don't have this at the moment, unless I've missed it. I could be wrong, but from when I checked, I couldn't see anything there. And I think this is something that we don't have to be ashamed to do as SEOs. Again, I think this is something that as a user, I've actually used this. I think it is useful to find related searches, related topics when you're just browsing and you're shopping. And so I don't think this is anything that's particularly spammy. I think it's really useful to users, and it's a great way to have a handy set of navigational links and get internal linking to those pages you care about. So I see this a lot on lots of retail sites. So yeah, definitely worth testing if you're on Bloomingdale's team. Next up is meta information. So mainly I'm just going to be looking at titles and meta descriptions here. Okay, so first of all, does the quantity of products matter? So when I looked at Bloomingdale's versus Nordstrom, and the majority of the categories that I checked, and admittedly I only sense checked a few, it looked like Nordstrom had a larger selection of products. So in this instance, you can see Nordstrom has 1,700 almost, or more than 1,700. Bloomingdale's only has about 220 odd. Now, if that's the case, maybe you want to test adding that to your title tags to show that you have a wider selection of products. So that's one test. But as a follow-up and as a caution, when I was putting myself in a user's perspective, I'm not sure what I'd think. If I Googled men's shirts and I saw a title tag that said, choose from over 1,700 men's shirts, that might be overwhelming, right? Maybe I'd think, God, I don't want to browse 1,700 products. That sounds too much hard work. And so, yeah, it is one idea, but I would certainly test it because I'm not sure how that would be. I'm not sure whether it'd be positive or not. However, related to that is whether or not to summarize it or shorten it. So maybe instead of saying 1,700, you could say 500 plus or 1,000 plus or something like that. And although this isn't the exact same case study, this was actually negative, and I thought this was quite interesting. This is a website that they wanted to test whether using exact numbers was wasn't as good as having something like 11 plus. So you can see here that the control page says 29 best workers, whereas the variant said 11 plus best workers. And the reason I picked this is, I guess in my scenario here, I was thinking, well, rather than saying choose from over 1,745 men's shirts, what if we tested choose from 500 plus, 100 plus, over 1,000 products? But yeah, just interesting to note that this was actually negative. It wasn't negative at 95% significance. I think it was negative about 80 or 85%. So yeah, just thought it was interesting and was worth mentioning. Now, I'm not going to go through this big wall of text. I've mainly put this here for people that read the slides afterwards, but I want to show you a process for coming up with essentially unlimited number of titles and meta descriptions. So the first thing I do is I look for a phrase that represents your category. So in this instance, I've used Ahrefs, which has this content gap tool. And so I've put in Nordstrom as my main domain. And then I've also put in Bloomingdale's, Dillard's, and Macy's. And what this is doing is looking for keywords that all four of these domains rank for somewhere. And I've also filtered it to keywords that are at least 3 words. And then you can get a list of these keywords that all these domains rank for. So what that gives you is a keyword that's essentially relevant to all these domains. And so I'm using that as a proxy for relevant to luxury fashion. And so in this instance, the keyword that I went for was women's dresses. And so once you have that, you can click into the keyword in Ahrefs, and then you can download the top 100 ranking websites for that keyword. And so when you do that, you can clean up the data a little bit, and what you'd end up with is the URL that's ranking for that, the title, and then you can extract things like the brand and the domain to essentially make this matrix. And so what I do is I look down all of the titles and I look for things that are mentioned. So Macy's, I can see mentions the word formal, casual, party. Express uses the words long, short. Someone else, ASOS mentions occasion. Some of them have prices in the title. Some of them have brands. Some of them talk about cocktail dresses. And so I essentially make a new column for every single one of, or as many as you want. I did it for as many as I could. I think I had about 20 or so different variables, as well as, of course, the exact keyword that we're looking for. So in this instance, it's women's dresses, and then I have some variants of that, like dresses for women and women's. So once you have that, you essentially have this matrix that shows you how many times or how many of those companies are using these different parameters or variables in title. And so you can use that to have a look at what are the most common patterns. And so in this instance, we can see that, no surprises. Most people, in fact, 100% of the sites use the word dresses. But there's also things like, are they using dashes or pipes? Are they using formal or best? Or did they have the year in the title? And so there's lots and lots of different variations here that you can use. But you can then divide it a little bit more and look at the comparison between the top sites and the bottom sites. So is there anything that the websites that are ranking really well that are doing that the ones that aren't ranking so well that are not doing? And I have to admit, I was a little bit disappointed with this one for the webinar, because there wasn't a ton of variety here. Sure, there's a couple of things like, more the lower ranked websites are using pipes, but for the most part, there isn't any clear-cut pattern here. It's fairly generic, but that's not always true. What I would say is that this shows me that there is potentially a reliance on sticking to the norm, right? Most of these titles are very, very basic. There's not a lot of variety in them. And that can happen because you can't test, right? If you are scared that you might drop your traffic, then you tend to stick to what is safe as opposed to being able to test more and more varieties. So just to show you an example might look like in another industry that's a little bit more interesting. This is one that I did for hotel websites. So the key term here was hotels London. And in this instance, you can see that more of the top websites use the term best. So 50% of them use best, whereas only 20% of the bottom sites use it. So maybe that's worth taking note of. Next is the star rating. So a lot of the bottom ranking websites use things like 3-star, 4-star, 5-star in the titles. And finally is luxury. So 50% of the sites in the bottom 20 use the word luxury, whereas only 5% of the sites in the top 20 sites use luxury. So it's a bit of a lottery. Sometimes you get some nice insights like this, sometimes you don't. But if nothing else, what you do get is a whole bunch of different modifiers that you can use to create lots and lots and lots of different variations of titles, to do hundreds and thousands of title tag tests every single year to give you a chance of increasing your traffic. Next up is structured data. So I have a couple of ideas for structured data, but the main thing I want to talk about actually is a general trend in structured data. So these images are taken from a recent Google blog post that went out. The one on the left is something that is coming to regular SERP soon, which is extra filters. So you can see here, if you type in something like shop jeans, you get these extra filters for things like wide leg, boot cut, and you can refine the search results. So this is this type of thing that we're seeing more and more of as Google blurs the line between Google Shopping and Google Organic searches. The one on the right is this new Shop the Look section, which is, when you come down the search results, you see this image and you can click on individual items which are in the image, and it'll bring up related products from different retailers that you can then go and look at those products. Now, the reason I mention this is all of this is only available because of structured data. And so rather than a specific test idea here, the main thing I would emphasize is structured data is here to stay. I think retailers should invest in it, because as these search results become more and more dynamic and have more control, that's how Google is going to allow users to find these extra filters on products. And so most sites at the moment, I actually can't remember if this is Nordstrom or Bloomingdale's, they're both essentially the same though, because most retailers do the same thing. They all have the basics. They've got the product name, the description, the brand, the price, etc. But you can do so much more than that now. You can even do things like say the audience of the product. So you can define the gender, the age range. You can talk about the availability. So is it in stock? You can have shipping information, the color, the size, the material, even things like the pattern. So you can say, is it plaid? Is it tartan? Is it got stripes and dots? All of these things can be added. I think it makes for a really good user experience if customers can filter for that on the search results. Now, I get that a lot of retailers are probably scared to do this, but like a lot of things in Google search, it's probably going to happen anyway. So you either play ball and get in the search results using this information, or else you'll be left behind. So yeah, definitely look at some of the more the newer filters that you can use. This is one of them actually. So pros and cons is this is on Bloomingdale's on the product pages. And I love pros and cons as a user. I think it's really helpful. I don't have to read through a bunch of reviews when the company just says, on average, people like these things, they don't like these things. But, and so the test idea here, I guess, is Nordstrom. I would recommend trying this. I think it gets extra content on the pages, and it's also good for users. So I think it's a decent idea. But since August this year, there is a pros and cons structured data that you can use. And so this is an example of what it would look like in search results. You can see pros and cons include consistent results, still sharp after many uses, etc., etc. And this is in addition to the reviews that you get. However, there is a catch, and that is that at the moment, this is currently only on editorial review pages. So it's not available for product pages. Maybe that'll change in the future, maybe not. However, the idea here, and I don't know whether this would work or not. I honestly haven't tried it on on any customers. But instead of, or as well as having this content on product pages, you could test moving some of that onto brand pages. So imagine when I put myself in a user's shoes, one of the last things I do before I buy a product is I'll check brand specific information. So if I imagine I'm searching for something like a leather jacket, and I find I narrow it down to a Polo Ralph Lauren leather jacket. The final thing I might do is check information like, does this thing last a long time? Does it fall apart? Did it have a good returns policy? What are the other reviews like? And so if I do any searches around those types of content, I think the brand page is probably the page that could rank for that. And I think it'd be really nice that if retailers could aggregate some of the individual product reviews. So you can see here there's 95 reviews on this single product. Imagine you took all of the Ralph Lauren reviews and then summarize them onto the brand page. And so you could say that on average, people like these things, and these things. They don't like this, this, and this. I think it'd be brilliant from a customer perspective, but this could possibly pass the threshold for editorial product reviews, because it's not a product page. It is there's an editorial aspect to it. And so I would try adding the pros and cons schema markup to the brand page instead of the actual product page itself. So yeah, if anyone tries that, I'd love to know if it works. As I said, I've not tried it myself, but I'm always interested in hearing how people got on. Okay, next is content and visual changes. So this is definitely in the bottom right of the quadrant that I mentioned. So this is, I think, a strong hypothesis, but it's expensive and difficult to do, which is a lot of the sort of key modules that I see on retailers, things like the review content, is client-side. So as I said, if you take this content and put it into the structured data testing tool, the only place I can find this is in the structured data itself. So you can see that this is in a JSON blob. It's not in the HTML of the page, which means Googlebot probably hasn't seen it. And so that content isn't on the page as far as Googlebot is concerned. And so I would test bringing that out and putting it to be server-side as opposed to client-side. Now, you could test this in a small way. You don't have to go and ask your engineering team to move the whole module. I would start small with this. I would take a few reviews. I would put them into a static HTML block, and I'd add them onto the page and see if there's any benefit to that. If there is, you could then justify taking it one step further and trying to do the rest of the reviews. Content on category pages is something that I see covered a lot in e-commerce and in retail websites, and it can be hard to do. In this instance, I really like what Nordstrom have done. They've got this tab which has a user guide to buying fitted shirts, essentially. And when I initially first clicked on this, I thought it was going to be content that's on the page. It's actually not. It takes you to another page, which is this one up here. There's a whole bunch of good information about how to find the perfect fit. Now, this is good. I think that's a good thing to do, but you may get some extra benefit if some of that content was on the category page itself. Now, this is a sort of a classic tension between product and SEO teams. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that we put all of this content on the category page, but it is something that we've fairly consistently seen benefits to, is adding some content to those category pages. So maybe try taking maybe even the top paragraph, something like that, and adding it to the category pages themselves. The content is there already. So it's not like you're having to spend a ton of money to get this content written. It's already there. We're just trying to test, can we get more value from it by adding some of that to the category pages? The hypothesis, of course, being that the men's shirts page would rank higher as a result of that extra content. Next is this section that is on actually both sites. This is the Nordstrom one at the top and the Bloomingdale's one at the bottom. I love these as a user. I think these are really good examples of scene related products and style guides and that kind of thing. The trouble is, yet again, this is all done using JavaScript. So when you check this on the structured data testing tool, none of it's there as far as Googlebot is concerned. And more importantly, none of these internal links to the products are going to count. And so again, this is definitely a bottom right test idea. But if you can move that to being server-side rendered rather than client-side rendered, I think that'd make a big, big difference. Someone that does this well is Net-a-Porter, who has this section at the bottom of their site called How to Wear It. Now, granted, it's not there aren't as many products. I think in the previous example, there's many, many more products in these examples. And I think, to be honest, I think this looks a bit better. But when you click on these links, these are actually real links to these product pages, which I think are probably benefiting these pages. Of course, you would have to test that. Don't take my word for it. But we have done other tests where we've seen that changing internal links from being client-side rendered to server-side rendered increases organic traffic to the pages that are being linked to. So that is it on all of the ideas. I think I said there was going to be 10 or so. I think there's actually more like 15 plus. So hopefully that was useful. There's one last bonus item that I thought I'd share because I thought it was pretty cool. It's not a test idea. It is a quick example of something that could be coming soon. So I don't know if anyone's seen these augmented reality search results. So at the moment, it's just in furniture. And so sites like IKEA and Target, you can see these furniture items in your own space, right? So you can look at how a chair would look in your apartment. But up until now, they've been very expensive to make and to create. So that's why you don't see it a ton. But it's really cool, right? It increases click-through rates. Users seem to really, really like them, according to Google's research. And Google has announced in a recent blog post that soon this is going to be coming to shoes. And not using really expensive methodologies. Due to advancements in machine learning, they say they can now automate this using just a handful of static images to create these 3D views of products. And so I thought for this webinar, shoes are a massive category for all of the websites that I looked at. So this is, yeah, really cool. They've mentioned that it will be coming soon in the coming months. I don't know what that means. It could be 1 month, it could be 12 months, who knows? But yeah, I thought this was really cool. And yeah, maybe some of you will get to try it out. So that is it. Thank you everyone for turning up. We have a couple of minutes for some questions if there are any. Otherwise, the link is there again to sign up to the email list, and yeah, you can get a new case study every 2 weeks. So yeah, please submit any questions and I'll answer them now. I have one now which is for metadata testing. How do Google title tag rewrites impact test results? Great question. So the really short answer to this is it doesn't, because if you were going to test that thing anyway, let's say add a price to a title or change anything, what you're testing for is would that be a positive impact in the real world? And so if you make the change and Googlebot rewrites it and they don't show your title tag, then that is true, right? They're not going to, obviously you're not going to see any result for that. So it's still a controlled experiment and it's still absolutely valid. Next is how do you part deploy breadcrumbs on parts of a site for testing? Yeah, good question. The bucketing by standard is basically you have to do it. It's a more complicated bucketing. You first of all bucket using the methodology that I explained on the top level, but then everything else underneath that has to be manually bucketed. And so you would ensure that all those pages sit underneath the correct category, and that way, yeah, you don't end up with product pages that are actually supposed to be variant and vice versa. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, it can get a little bit in the weeds. Feel free to drop me an email and I can answer that details. Feel free to keep submitting them. How do you guys decide what confidence level a test idea has. You mentioned 80 or 95%. So yeah, so like I said, this really depends on what your risk appetite is. The standard answer you'll get when everyone talks about testing is 95% significance. However, we always talk about we are doing business, not science. We're not trying to test here for vaccines or something like that. We're trying to make the best decisions we can with the data that we have. And like I said, when we look at that 2x2 quadrant for something that's a very strong hypothesis and it's very cheap to do, let's say it's structured data, you might decide that you value being able to get more tests done than waiting to get 95% significance. Because imagine you started a test and you are 3 weeks in and it's at 80% statistical significance. To get from 80 to 95 could take another 3 weeks, could take another 4 weeks. So you might decide, you know what, this is structured data. I've seen it be positive somewhere else. I value getting on to the next one. I want to move on to the next experiment and take the chance that also it's worth mentioning when we say 80% confidence, we are saying that's the chance that it is at least not negative. So you might decide to almost default to deploy when you have these confident test ideas. Hopefully that makes sense. Just looking at some of the others. Regarding titles, do you try and keep under 60 characters with spaces? Will Google read characters beyond what it displays in search results? So the good thing is you don't really need to worry about that, because a hypothesis is a hypothesis. If your theory is, I want a really long title, and you test that and it's positive, then that is the truth, right? That is what that's what would be happening in the real scenario if you were to deploy that onto your actual website. So yeah, it's fine to have long titles, short titles, because we're testing it anyway. Okay, time for maybe one more question. One that's come up quite a few times is how do we measure performance? And it's a great question because I actually didn't cover it in the slides. One of the things that people assume we look at is things like rank tracking software or Search Console data. We don't need to look at that. You might want to look at it as well, because they can be good for directional hints or understanding why your traffic increased or decreased. But both rankings and Search Console data are just proxies for organic traffic. So sometimes you'll make a change and your rankings will increase, but your click-through rate won't. And sometimes your click-through rate will increase and your rankings won't. Under either of those scenarios, you want to be able to detect positive and negative changes. So we essentially ignore that for the analysis piece and only look at organic traffic. So by focusing on organic traffic, we would detect click-through rate increases and ranking increases. And that's ultimately what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to increase organic traffic to the pages. It might sound a bit extreme, but I don't really care whether it was rankings or click-through rates. What I care about was the end result. And so all of the dashboards in Search Pilot by default are looking at Google organic traffic, and then you can break it down by mobile and desktop if you want to do further analysis. Okay, we are out of time. So thank you once again, everyone, for turning up. Really appreciate it. I hope that was useful. And yeah, hope everyone has a nice end to the year and a happy new year when it comes. Thanks.